حبوبي بالوصال نعم علي وجد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم تسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah, we have reached the final former session. And when we were speaking outside, Uncle Simon, about doing this every day, one of the amazing things about this book is the teachers of our teachers, Hamid Muhammad, all the way back down the line, they were dedicated to this book in amazing ways. Like the Ihya is one of these books that we really should be reading every single day. And there was one of the Sa'aadah from al-Shatari, they said that had memorized the entire Ihya ʿUlum, such that he could distinguish between a waw and a fa. Right? That's like, if for hafal, that's one of the hardest things to do. Is there a waw there or is there a fa there? Right? And that they could distinguish between a waw and a fa. They had that degree of. And Imam al-Idrus, he that taught the Ihya ūl-Madin to his brother, Shaykh Ali, who dies about 30 years later at 895. He passed away in 865, Imam al-Idrus. But he was, of all those who praised the Ihya, no one praised it like he did. And he taught the Ihya 25 times to his brother, Shaykh Ali. And every time that they would do a khatam and finish, they'd have a huge celebration. And this is a part of his, what you could call his project of promulgation. He wanted people to know that this is the book that you need to stick to. This book will keep you in line. And because it corresponds with what's called the diaspora of the Sa'aadah Ba'adi, where it's right around this time that the son of Imam al-Idrus, Imam Abu Bakr al-Ali, goes to Aden. And the hijrah and the migration of the Hadramis, especially Sa'aadah, started before that. It's actually an amazing story that the Arab controlled the Indian Ocean trade routes from times BC. So that's one of the reasons that Islam spread so quickly. And you have that famous story of the king in India who saw the splitting of the moon, who built a masjid in the earliest period. He's buried in modern day Oman. But Islam spread very quickly to East Africa, southwest India, and all the way into the Malay archipelago. And then it took time for it really to penetrate deep in, but it was on the coastal region. That's why there was, within a short time after the hijrah, even in southeast China, there were Muslims, because it was on these trade routes. It's an amazing story. Anyhow, this was one of the things that he did, was he wanted to make sure that people knew how important this book was. So he'd have a huge celebration, public celebration every time they finished. And then Shaykh Ali, that he ended up, he studied it 25 times and then taught it 25 times. And then his son, Abdurrahman, Imam Abdurrahman bin Ali, he's the one who kashif, yani, qabl nabi al-Ahud, his name's Ayn al-Mukashifin, is his epithet. And he studied it 40 times and then taught it 40 times. So then there's others who did it other numbers. Just imagine, this is a long book. It takes a long time to get through. And some of them made a nadhar. They vowed that they were going to read a portion of the Ihya ūl-Madin every single day. And so this is a really, really important book. Alhamdulillah, more and more translations are coming out. Unfortunately, some of these translations are not as accessible as others. But inshallah ta'ala, I hope we live to see the day where we have a really good, readable translation that is consistent. As you can see, Imam al-Ghazali is a systematic thinker, and it really requires that you translate his technical terms very carefully. And if you notice, Shaykh Yasser is very careful about translating certain terms, and that's wise. Because once you mistranslate a term, is that you're very likely to get the concept wrong. And so it's better actually at times at the level of teaching to under-translate as opposed to over-translate. Ala barakatillah. So, let's continue our study. We have 6 more signs of the scholars of the hereafter to talk about. So we reached number 7. This is where he says, radiallahu anhu, his main concern, this scholar or this person of knowledge, and by extension, anyone that wants to understand a criterion, whether or not they're really adhering to the path of the science of the path to the hereafter. His main concern is knowledge of the inward, in keeping watch over his heart, knowing the path of the next world and traveling it, sincerely hoping to be shown it by combating his ego through mujahada, in spiritual vigilance over himself, muraqabah, since subduing the ego leads to beholding the divine. Wow, look how much is in that statement. And so again, even if someone is gifted in many of the various scholarly disciplines, that's good, and if they make the right intention, they're going to be fulfilling a fard kifaya, a communal obligation. However, even with all of that, and the same thing could apply, someone who's a very successful businessman, or someone who works that 60 to 70 hour or plus work weeks, if you have to do certain things, try your best to put everything in its proper place. Take what it is that you need, and the number one way that you can apply the ilm tariq al-akhirah to your career is, one, first and foremost, make sure that the line of work that you have is permissible. That's the first step. Make sure your income is halal. If your income is not halal, it affects everything you buy with that money. And this is one of the foundations of the spiritual path. People tend to forget, is halal income. It's one of the foundations, one of the most important early foundations that they emphasize of the spiritual path, is to have a halal income, because then it taints everything else if that's not there. And then after ensuring that it's halal, then see if you can, with something that you want to do and earn a living through, benefit someone through that, such that it becomes a fard kifaya. Then you can make the intention to fulfill an obligation. And then the third criterion is a little bit more subtle, a little bit more difficult, especially in our day and age when, small business is not the same now that it was before. Owning your own business is more difficult than in previous times with these mega corporations that are just eating everybody up. It's still possible, but this is knowing when enough is enough. Knowing when enough is enough. So if you are applying ilm tariq al-akhirah to career, and you have a career option where you can get a raise and you can move up to another position, up the corporate ladder, but you know it's going to be more stressful, you know you're going to work harder, and that goes along with earning more money, it might be better to stay where you are. Right? And this is sometimes easier said than done, but I guarantee you, if you live by these principles, Allah will change your reality and facilitate things for you in ways that are totally unexpected, even if at first you go through a little bit of difficulty. The only condition that you need to accompany with that is to be content with a little bit less. And so when we talk about trust in Allah, we speak about zuhud, detachment before trust in Allah, in the hierarchy of the maqamat al-yaqeen, the stations of certainty, because it's a prerequisite of trust. Allah has guaranteed your basic provision. He's not guaranteed that you're going to be wealthy. So if you trust in Allah Ta'ala and are willing to detach a little bit and live basically, your provision usually will be facilitated for you. And again, when we talked about this whole idea of practicality, this is very real, that a heart that enters into the workforce knowing that their employer does not provide their risk for them and relies upon them it will be qualitatively different than someone who just goes to the workplace and does whatever in a very, very real way. So, thank you. So what he's saying here is, no matter what it is that you do, whether you're involved in a scholarly field, or whether you have a career, or whatever it is that you're doing in life, the sign that we're really a traveler, let's just say, let's make it broader, on the path to the hereafter, is that our number one concern is ilm al-batin, inward knowledge. وَمُرَاقَبَةَ الْقَلْبِ, looking over our heart and making sure our heart is in a good condition, and making decisions accordingly. We all know there are certain things that harden the heart. There are certain environments that harden the heart. There are certain acts that when you do them, they harden the heart. And so we need to be careful of that. Where we go, what it is that we do, and what we allow our eyes to see and ears to hear. Because they're the two quickest channels to the heart. Even though every action we do on our limbs affects our heart. But the two quickest ways to spoil the heart are through the eyes and the ears. And what a blessing if you think about eyelids from this perspective. Because you can all of a sudden, whoop, you close them. Look at it. We even use that as a metaphor, like the blink of an eye. Oh, your eyes are just closed. And like, even if it's right before you, like, I can't see, my eyes are closed. And then your tongue, there's even two ways, because the tongue is so dangerous. Your teeth, so if you clench your teeth like this, you can still talk a little bit, but you don't really sound normal. You close your lips, and you can't hear anyone at all. So it's just like we say, bite your tongue. Class. Yani close your teeth and close your lips. And literally, as we say, shut your mouth. That's usually a kind of a rude thing to say, but we need that, right? Just shut your mouth. Don't say it. Keep it in. Take a deep breath, calm down. There's a whole sunnah of what to do when you get angry. And that if you're standing, sit. If you're sitting, lie down. Separate yourself from the situation, go to the other room. Take a walk, take a shower, take a bath, cool yourself off, pour water, cold water over your head, whatever. Right? Anyhow, what he's saying here is that a person who is really living up to ilm tariq al-akhirah, this is their primary concern. And so we'll talk about this tomorrow morning, but just to throw this out there now, we have to have a regular dose of this type of knowledge. And ideally, in a formal setting, at least once a week. And if we can go to that in person, in our locale, that's better. If not, there's options online, alhamdulillah. And if you can't watch something live, then watch the recording of it. From the bounty of Allah, this is more and more available. And alhamdulillah, in England, you are much better off than almost everybody else in Europe. And in many ways, that much better off than the vast majority of people in the United States of America. For a Western country, that you all have a lot more resources here than most other people, and almost every other Western country that I can actually think about that's English speaking or considered to be Western. So what does he say here is that we also should be concerned to do what is called mujahada. Okay? Because what happens, فَإِنَّ الْمُجَاهَدَةَ تُفْدِي إِلَى الْمُشَاهَدَةِ. What happens is that when you place in spiritual struggle, it leads to mushahada, an unveiling, a divine witnessing. But here, not divine witnessing, let's translate it different. An unveiling, في دقائق علوم القلوب, in the subtleties of the knowledge of the heart. And so from here, I've heard our teacher, Habib Adi, say about Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab. He was a very intelligent person. He used to say, "Lastu bi khab wa la yakhda'ni khab." I am not a manipulator, nor do I let someone else manipulate me. He was very intelligent. He had a very strong, penetrating, that aql. And he was a person who was somewhat barbaric before he became Muslim. And he was violent. And he buried his daughter alive. And he did a lot of things that he regretted after becoming Muslim. But when he became Muslim, there was a struggle. As opposed to Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq. he was the closest companion to Rasulullah before he became Muslim. So he was already refined to the highest degree. And so faith for him was absolutely no hesitation, immediately, boom. And were his faith to be on one side of the scale and the faith of the Ummah on the other, it would outweigh it. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr, it's different. And both are good, but there's different archetypes of people. Some people that come from the days of ignorance before Islam, they have a lot more to work on than others. Some people have a lot of trauma. Some people have a lot of stuff to deal with. And other people, it's smooth sailing. People are different. So with Sayyidina Umar, one of the beautiful things the Prophet said about him is that إِنَّ فِي الْأُمَّةِ لَمُحَدَّثِينَ. Not muhaddithin, that's a hadith scholar. Muhaddith, yani, is a hadith scholar. Muhaddath, yani a mulham. Indeed, there are people in my community that are inspired. Yani they receive inspiration from Allah, which comes vis-a-vis an angel. وَإِنَّ عُمَرَ لَمِنْهُمْ. Indeed, Umar is from them. So Sahabi Ali said, is because of how he was before he became Muslim, and then how hard he worked, the mujahada, the struggle after he became Muslim, it led to what Imam al-Ghazali is saying here, is that he was gifted these beautiful insights, subtleties of the knowledge of the hearts. And even to the extent that on multiple occasions, he said something and then revelation was revealed as a result. And it corresponded to the opinion of Umar. Isn't that amazing? And it just shows everyone has their virtue. Sayyidina Abu Bakr is Sayyidina Abu Bakr. But you don't have this virtue, that's Umar's virtue. That what are known as the muwafaqat of Umar. There's books been written about this, about the things that he said and then revelation was sent down corresponding to what Umar said, which is a really amazing thing. So this is what mujahada does. Tufdi, it leads to a knowledge of the subtleties of the science of the heart. And then وَتَتَّفَجِّرْ بِهَا يَنَابِعُ الْحِكْمَةِ مِنَ الْقَلْبِ. And then the springs of wisdom pour forth from the heart. And there's a beautiful hadith that says, مَنْ أَخْلَصَ لِلَّهِ أَرْبَعِينَ صَبَاحًا. Whoever is sincere to Allah for 40 straight days, literally mornings, تَفَجَّرَتْ يَنَابِعُ الْحِكْمَةِ مِنْ قَلْبِهِ عَلَى لِسَانِهِ. The springs of wisdom will pour forth from their heart onto their tongue. And when you are around the real people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the scholars who put their knowledge into practice, you see this. I remember being at the RIS convention in Toronto many years back when Habib Ali came. And he was there for the knowledge retreat, and he was teaching book 22 of the Ihya, which is the book on disciplining the soul, which is the red cover that Shaykh Abdul Hakim Murad translated. And this is where Imam al-Ghazali lays out his ethical theory. And I'd been familiar with the book and looked at it before, but I noticed when Habib Ali was commenting on the book, without really telling people, he was adding and saying things that Imam al-Ghazali wasn't saying. He was adding to it. Yani there was insights that he was getting into intricacies of this ethical theory that Imam al-Ghazali didn't even mention. And I remember saying to him, I was like, Sidi, what you were saying was not in the books. Right? And they kind of deflect these things from themselves and things like that, but it was clearly, right, this, fath, Allah was giving him an opening. I remember being with Sayyid Habib Umar one time. It was in a small gathering at a brother named Bishr's house, Bishr al-Bayanuni. His great-grandpa was the famous Shaykh Isa al-Bayani, a very blessed individual, that said that famous line of poetry that jasadun tamakkana hubba ahmada fihi tallahi innal arda la tublihi. A physical body that the love of Ahmad, our Prophet has become firmly rooted in it by Allah, that the earth will never let eat it. So there was a Shaykh from Medina, Shaykh Muhammad Zuhair, he was a Syrian Shaykh, who did a critical edition of Sahih Bukhari. He asked Bishr, his brother Bishr, to ask Habib Umar a question. what is the meaning of the epithet, or really it's a kunya, but it's more like an epithet, of Sayyidah Fatima. She's Ummi Abiha. She's the mother of her father. So outwardly, you can explain that in different ways, right? That our Prophet ﷺ, excuse me, lost his, he was 2 months in the womb of his mother when he lost his father, before he was born, and then he loses his mother when he was young. And so, Sayyidah Fatima, that she was one of those that remained with him in the household. Her older sisters got married, and that when they moved out, she was the one who cared for the Prophet ﷺ, especially after the passing of Sayyidah Khadija. And so she was like a mother to her father, meaning that what you kind of receive from the care and the love of the mother, he would receive from his blessed daughter, and had an incredibly beautiful relationship. But that's not what Shaykh Muhammad was asking. He was asking him the spiritual meaning. And then Habib Umar paused for like 2 seconds. And then immediately he says, the spiritual light of Sayyidah Fatima is so powerful and intense. When it's unveiled to someone, you think that that's the source of all light in the realm of the means. He says, but the reality is, so the because the means the source. It's mother, but it's also source. He says, but the reality is that no, the Prophet's light was the source of everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. It's the source of everything in this world. He says, but at first it seems like it's the source. What a response. What book do you find that in? Like, what book is that in? I've heard Sayyid Habib Umar say that there will be people on the Day of Judgment that are so close to the Prophet ﷺ, is that when he comes out of his prostration, when he prostrates beneath the throne, and he raises up out of his prostration, and it's said to him, ask and you'll be given, intercede, you'll be granted intercession. That when our Prophet is inspired with those Muhammad, those words of praise that he said in this world, I don't know them now, in which it will become clear to all people who've ever lived, including the prophets, why the Prophet was preferred over anyone else. There'll be people that from the closest of people that hear them in ways that other people don't. What kind of understanding is that? Who would even think about something like that if you weren't gifted that knowledge? He also mentioned that there are people who hear sard ahdath al-sirah from the Femme Sharifa. There will be people that in paradise, on the Day of Judgment and in paradise, who hear a recounting of the sirah from the blessed mouth of the Prophet ﷺ himself. Not from a book, right? From him himself. These are the type of things that he's referring to here. Is that, some of them don't. These are the type of things that are possible when you embark upon this type of path and when you connect to the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you'll find that these insights that they have in verses in the Quran, in relation to the Prophet ﷺ, something that pertains to the hereafter, that they enrich you in a way that is really, really powerful, right? Knowing these things. And, then they mostly come out though in their poetry. They mostly come out in their poetry. And so that, if we would translate some of those lines that Sayyid Ahmed recited last night, and about the poem of Sayyid Umar, very deep meanings of things that Allah Ta'ala gave him, and that what happens when someone connects to them, these great people. And again, I'm just speaking from my experience, my teacher. This applies to all of the great inheritors of the Prophet ﷺ that are still with us on the face of this earth. And so that he goes on to say here is that these are things that you'll be given that are not found in books. And he says, بل الحكمة الخارجة عن الحصر والعد إنما تنفتح بالمجاهدة. This wisdom and these gems of wisdom that someone is given, that there's no way to truly put a number on them. The key that opens them is mujahada, is struggling against yourself, and muraqabah, watching carefully over your heart. And so that's going to be the final reflection session we do tomorrow morning, inshallah. We're going to reflect upon this reality of muraqabah, because this is one of the very important take-homes. And we'll explain that then, and we're going to look into a story. It's one of my favorite stories of all, by the great Imam Sahal ibn Abdullah al-Tustari. Is that he was taught to say these three blessed phrases, Allahu ma'i, Allah is with me, to the end. I'm not going to tell you. Make sure that you wake up tomorrow morning. So don't go to sleep too late. Or if you go to sleep too late, just make sure you wake up on time. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. And so he says here that how many people have spent time learning, and that they've learned for a prolonged period of time, but they don't have an ability to add anything to knowledge, that all they can do is just repeat what it is that they heard. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what he's saying is that there's a door for you to receive understandings. If you do this, you'll find that even at basic levels, you'll have understandings that other people don't have. And this is, of course, mentioned by our Prophet himself, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This is one aspect of this knowledge he referred to, man amila bima alima. Whoever puts into practice, acts upon that which they know, what transpires, وَرَّثَهُ اللَّهُ إِلْمَ مَا لَمْ يَعْلَمْ. Allah will give this individual knowledge that they do not have. What is that knowledge? And Allah speaks in the Quran about ilm al-ladunni, knowledge that comes directly from the presence of Allah. And this was the knowledge that Khidr was given. And the famous story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, when he was asked that, is there anyone more knowledgeable than you on earth? And that he said no. Right? He pointed to himself as being that most, and then that it was revealed to him, no, my servant Khidr is more knowledgeable. But then look what Sayyidina Musa did. That he was sincere, and he was humble, and he embarks upon a long journey because he wants knowledge. If there's a knowledge that I don't have, hakada. And so we can take the etiquettes of learning from the story of Jibreel coming to the Prophet just as you can take it from the story of Musa and Khidr. And that لَقَدْ لَقِينَا مِنْ سَفِينَ هَذَا نَصَبًا. Right? We have tired ourselves out, right? That in this travel of ours, and there's so many beautiful nuances. Anyhow, is that was the knowledge that Khidr had been given. And just as there's ilm al-ladunni, it's also ajr al-ladunni. There's also reward that comes from the presence of Allah directly. Right? And one example of that is in the Hadith Qudsi, إِلَّا الصَّوْمِ فَإِنَّهُ لِي وَأَنَا أَجْزِي بِهِ. Except fasting, that is for me, and I will recompense directly. All reward in reality is from Allah, but there's certain reward that comes directly from the presence of Allah without any intermediary. And that's the greatest reward of all, like ajr al-ladunni. And that's the type of reward that the Prophet taught the companions to seek. So when Sayyidah Aisha used to give out charity, she used to have people listen to the du'as that the people made so that she could make the same du'a for them. And so a du'a for a du'a, and she wanted her reward directly from Allah. Putting into practice his words, إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. We only feed you for the sake of Allah. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكْرًا. We do not want any recompense from you, or even thanks. Now the person is supposed to thank the person who does something nice for them, but the person who does something nice for them should not want them to thank them. So if we are disgruntled when we do nice things for people that they don't thank us, we have to check our intentions. And that's natural, that happens. It all happens to all of us till this day. But we have to check ourselves. Oh wait, if I did this for Allah, it actually doesn't matter whether they thanked me or not, even though that's what they're supposed to do. So this is what he says here. And he even goes as far to say that ولولا أن إدراك قلب من له قلب النور الباطن حاكما إن الظاهر. So that he goes as far to say that this light that Allah places in the heart that leads to this knowledge is that it actually is in a place of arbitration over even outward knowledge. And he mentions the proof of that in the Prophet saying, Istafti qalbak. Seek a fatwa from your heart. Yani, being in tune with where your heart is. And the scholars talk in great detail about that. And some say this refers to a particular type of heart that can really do this. But in general, if we're in a balanced individual, we're not someone that has misgivings and a lot of waswasa, is that you want to look at the state of your heart when it comes to certain decisions. And after consultation, this type of thing, if there's a bit of uneasiness, then it is likely that that is not the best thing to do. This is one of the most beautiful quotes. And this is a quote of Sayyidina Ali, that his famous companion Kumail, and in some narrations that he is explaining to him about the true scholars and the description of the true scholars who put the knowledge into practice. And so he says, هَجَمَ بِهِمُ الْعِلْمِ عَلَى حَقِيقَةِ الْأَمْرِ. Sayyidina Ali was one of the most eloquent of all people. Yani Allahu Akbar. He says that the knowledge that they had, because it's true knowledge, rushed them to the reality of the affair. So the haqiqat amr, which is understanding the fabric of reality as it is, this knowledge these true people were given, hajma bihim, it literally rushed them and exposed them to haqiqat amr, the reality of the affair. And as a result, what happened? فَبَاشَرُوا رُوحَ الْيَقِينِ. So they experienced the spirit of certitude. And the word here, bashara, your bishara is your skin. Bashara is to do something firsthand. So the result of this knowledge that led to an understanding of the reality of the affair, they attained a higher degree of certitude. But then, what was the effect that this had on their physical limbs? And what is it they did? فَاسْتَلَانُوا مَسْتَوْعَرَ مِنْهُ الْمُتْرَفُونَ. The mutrafun, the opulent, the ones that just are enjoying the things of this world, these individuals found it easy to do what the opulent found difficult. So what the people of the world found difficult, these people found it easy. And you see this, even at a basic level. You go to a place, like a special place, our example we mentioned is Tarim, but Tarim is hard. They don't have all the amenities, very hot. It's hot for us, growing up in California. Let alone you all here, it's like, if it gets to 30 Celsius here, that's like hot, right? Like it's like stay inside and like, yani, most places here don't have air conditioners, do they? Right, whatever. Like, imagine being in 45, 50 degree weather. That's gonna bake you, honey. But there's something about the spiritual nature of these lands that make it, for people, some people bearable, and for others that you actually don't even really think about it. And there's something that the spiritual nature of these places makes it easier. Anyhow, and then he goes on to say, وَأَنِسُوا بِمَسْتَوْحَشَ مِنْهُ الْغَافِلُونَ. So the heedless, the things that they were alienated from, that brought them wahsha, alienation, they found intimacy in. So an example of that is like, let's just say fasting. That someone who is just in a state of heedlessness and just wants things to be easy, oh my God, I gotta fast. Go without food, I'm gonna be tired, I'm gonna yawn, I'm gonna be hungry. But these people, they actually find intimacy in those things. In reciting Quran for a prolonged period of time, waking up in the wee hours of night and things of this nature. Again, these are examples of people that we want to aspire. No one's claiming that we're like them. We read this so that we can start taking the first steps to move in the direction of where these people are. And then look at this beautiful way of framing this. Sahib ad-dunya bi-abdanihim. Sahib is to take the companionship. So They took the companionship of the world with their physical bodies. In other words, they existed outwardly in the world with their physical bodies. Many of the things that other people did, they did. They eat, they sleep, they work. But أَرْوَاحُهُمْ مُعَلَّقَةٌ بِالْمَحَلِّ الْأَعْلَى. But their spirits are attached to the highest realms. So physically they're there, but their spirits are in the highest realms. And then what does he say? أُولَٰئِكَ أَوْلِيَاءُ اللَّهِ. Those are the true people of Allah, Azza wa Jal, min khalqih, from amongst His creation. وَأُمَنَاءُهُ, His trusted servants. وَعَمَّالُهُ, those that work for Him. فِي أَرْضِهِ, in His lands. وَالدُّعَاةِ إِلَى دِينِهِ, these are the true people that are calling to His deen. And it's really amazing to think about this. The more detached we are from the world, the more that we affect the world. There was no one more detached than the Prophet ﷺ. And it was precisely because he was so detached, waiting and longing and wanting to meet Allah in every single moment, that allowed him to do what was needed to be done in that moment. And one of the greatest examples of someone that we've been blessed to meet in this is our blessed teacher, Habib Jeffrey. May Allah Ta'ala protect him and preserve him. And this is a person who's from the great people of Allah of our time. And someone that goes through very, very powerful states. And oftentimes is not accessible for extended periods of time because of the power of the spiritual state that he's going through. And then he'll come out of this state, which you think that you would be a bit discombobulated when you kind of come back to this world and have to still be here. And give an incredibly powerful and insightful interview on a television with very difficult questions. Like, how can you go to a state where like you're just not with creation because of the power of your spiritual experience, and then all of a sudden is that with an international audience and issues that are really difficult to deal with, to be right on point. La ilaha illallah. Because it's precisely because he's so detached and he recognizes what needs to be done here in this world. That's the way that the true inheritors are. So the more detached we are, the more impact it will have on society and those around us. Okay, that was a long explanation for number 7. Number 8. وَمِنْهَا أَنْ يَكُونَ الْيَقِينُ أَنْ يَكُونَ شَدِيدِ الْعِنَايَةِ بِتَقْوِيةِ الْيَقِينِ, is that this person should be greatly concerned to strengthen their certitude. So we have it here as, he perpetually strives to deepen his inward certitude. And our Prophet said, al-yaqeen al-iman kulluh, certitude is all of faith. Why? Because yaqeen is the ra'su mal ad-deen. It is the capital of the deen. In other words, everything is built on this. And there's another hadith in Abu Nu'aym and al-Bayhaqi mentioned, ta'allamu al-yaqeen, learn certitude. And the meaning of this is, Imam al-Ghazali says, وَمَعْنَوْ جَالِسُ الْمُوقِنِينَ, spend time with and sit with the people of certitude. وَاسْمَعُوا مِنْهُمْ عِلْمَ الْيَقِينَ, they'd hear from them that which will give you knowledge of certainty. وَوَاظِبُ عَلَى الْإِقْتِدَاءِ بِهِمْ, force yourself to constantly to follow them and emulate them. لِيَقْوَى يَقِينُمْ كَمَا قَوْيَ يَقِينُمْ, so that your certitude strengthens like their certitude strengthened. So this is a very important, very, very important aspect of the scholars of the hereafter, and the signs of the scholars of the hereafter, and by extension those of us who are trying to follow in their footsteps. He perpetually strives to deepen his inward certitude. And then moving on to the next one, and this is now number what? 9. أن يكون حزينا منكسرا مطرقا صامتا, is that this person He is somber, subdued, bowed of head, and spare of words. The awe of the divine being plain in his manner and dress, movements and rest, speech and silence. No one sees him without being reminded of Allah Most High. His manner bespeaking his works. So this is how these people are. Hazin in here doesn't mean that you walk around and like people see you as sad. No, outwardly we should smile. Outwardly we have a job to help people and uplift people. What this means is in our heart, because of a constant concern that we have for our own state, we're aware of the reality of the predicament of the children of Adam, but then also that thinking about other people. But we also want to be munkasiyan, we're broken. And the strongest of people outwardly, that are the most firm and the most steadfast, that have the highest degree of fortitude, they're the most broken internally. They are completely broken before Allah. So this blessed poem that we just heard recited here, the last line that was sung, that he said that, بِرَبِّ قِيَامِ, through my Lord I am subsisting. My subsistence is through my Lord. Not la bi nafsi, it's not with my nafs or anything else, it's through my Lord. And so if we even have just even a fanciful imagination that we somehow think that we're doing something, Allah Ta'ala usually will put us in a situation to remind us, no, you're not doing anything at all. What we want to do is to be in a state where we don't need to be sent to tribulation to recognize that. Mutrikan samitan. They tend to be silent often. They only speak for a great purpose. And the tranquility that's in their hearts, the serenity that they're experiencing, is oftentimes seen. Just being in their presence, your heart just changes. Anyone who's been around special people like this, just by being around them, as Shaykh Musab was saying, like their state is contagious, but in a good way. It spills over and affects other people. And this is why that if we find people like this, that we want to spend time with them and remain with them. So that's number 9. And then we'll move on to number 10. He mainly seeks knowledge of spiritual works and what vitiates them. And يكون أكثر بحثي عن علم الأعمال. How can I do works to draw near to Allah? We all know what the path is. And again, we'll touch on this tomorrow morning, but in preparation for that, we want to plan out our day and our week. These are the things that I'm going to do on a daily basis. These are the things that I'm going to do on a weekly basis. These are the things that I'm going to do on a yearly basis. This is what I'm going to do for this time of the year or for this period of my life. Plan these things out. This is really important. And that trying to make sure that you do all of those things in the right way. What are the necessary etiquettes? What are the various things that can spoil them, get in the way, create obstacles? That looking at that how shaitan tries to spoil them. Have you ever noticed, like in retrospect, like right before you're about to take a special trip, that sometimes you get in an argument with your spouse or with your children or some people around you, or there's a weekly gathering and you're just in a state of heedlessness and just something happens, right? Something happens right before the gathering. And you get to the gathering and your heart is disturbed because you're still bothered by what just transpired. Right? Look at shaitan, the way he gets people, like right before iftar. You're late, you're driving to someone's house, you want to be there in time, you have a headache, you're a little bit tired, there's a little bit of traffic, and then just enough to like, spoil it so that when you break your fast and du'as are accepted, your heart is khalas, not in the best state. And then the last 2, in conclusion, أن يكون اعتماده في علوم على بصيرته وإدراكه بصفاء قلبه. These are a little bit more advanced, but he relies in his branches of learning upon genuine insight. That is, of course, rooted in real knowledge. But insight is important. And that same Shaykh Muhammad Zuhair that I mentioned, I remember being with him with this same brother, Sidi Bishop, And I remember him asking about why Imam al-Ghazali mentioned a particular hadith in a particular chapter. And he commented on that saying, it's like, these things aren't known easily. There's a knowledge dimension, but beyond knowledge, there's also an insight dimension. Why did Imam Bukhari? He takes his 7,000 plus hadith in Bukhari. It's a lot less than that if you take out the muqarrarat, the multiple narrations. That he takes it from 300,000 hadith. And he didn't put a hadith in his blessed collection until he first played Salat al-Istikhara. What does the guidance prayer have to do with a scholarly criterion by which you accept hadith? It's an additional criterion. He doesn't change his scholarly criterion. He's not going to put a hadith in his book that doesn't meet the scholarly criterion. That's going to be that moved out immediately. But even after it fits that scholarly criterion, he still prayed 2 rak'ahs of istikhara. This is something along the lines of what Imam al-Ghazali is meaning here. And then finally we have, he shuns spurious matters in religion newly begun. He is someone who is especially aware of the danger of what is called bid'ah, innovations. And not in the way that that term is mostly used and that we're used to hearing. Because on one hand, there are people who abuse and misuse this term. On the other hand, that if you understand the bid'ah for what it is, that the very fact that we have a concept of bid'ah is a blessing from Allah. And sometimes it requires you being from a certain background, and I can say this, having been raised a Protestant Christian, that what a blessing to have the concept of bid'ah, such that the deen remains preserved and you don't want it to get altered over time. That the very fact that this was put into the hearts of the companions and the Prophet spoke so carefully about this, there was an attempt for the past 1400 years to preserve the deen so that it's not watered down in a way that it's distorted, you don't have access to the true meanings. So it's a blessing. At the same time, when you understand what bid'ah really is, you have to avoid those negative aspects, especially those that are haram or makruh. But if you say that there's other types of things that are bid'ah, but that's either permissible, recommended, or even obligatory, there's certain types of obligatory bid'ahs, just as there's recommended bid'ahs. And the fact that we have a recommended bid'ah is a blessing from Allah. So the Maulid is an example of that. It's a bid'ah hasanah. That was not done in the way that we're doing it during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But the companions didn't need a Maulid to celebrate the Prophet ﷺ. They were with him. They were thinking about him by night and day. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq is known to, after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, to sit in the corner of his room, muhtabiyan, with his arms around his knees, and he would just keep repeating him, say, Wa shawqa ila Rasulillah. Oh, how I long for the Messenger of Allah. Oh, how I long for the Messenger of Allah. He just kept repeating, oh, how I long for the Messenger of Allah. You can take this as a wird. Just sit and just keep repeating it. And just you repeat something that makes you long for the Prophet ﷺ over and over again, over and over again, over and over again. You can say the same thing for your shuyukh. This is why loving them is so important, because it helps you embrace death and knowing that they'll be there for you in the hereafter. This is what helped my father become Muslim, alhamdulillah, was this. And sometimes it takes people a long time. My father didn't become Muslim until much later in his life, and I was worried because he had dementia. And that my mother said to my father, if you become Muslim, Habib Umar can help you. And I didn't tell her that. That was just, she came to understand that. And she converted years before him. So when I went to him, she tried to ask him to become Muslim. He didn't respond. So I went and I told Habib Umar. I said, Habib, my mom said, kada, kada, kada. And Habib, imtala. It was one of those moments where when I said that you could tell Habib was in a different state. And he said, tell your father that Umar is asking him to take his shahada. Right. And he gave me a subha and he said, here, take this and give this back to your father. So I go home, I wait for the right time. I give him the subha and I say, Dad, Umar is asking you to take your shahada. And he wasn't expecting that. And it's kind of like, yani, you know, and he just kind of thought about it. And he looks at my mom, he says, what do you think? And she said, you know what I think, and you should do it. So he said, well, if he said that, I can't refuse. And then he took his shahada. But what was really behind that was this recollection, like, I'm going to die. And that's part of what it was from my mother as well. That they, like, these are, but this was before they became Muslim, that they came to believe in this individual in ways that even Muslims don't believe in these things. Yani, because there was something that their heart understood from this. The language that was being spoke was beyond the Arabic that came from the tongue. It was the state that was speaking to their innermost state that transcends language. And alhamdulillah, like this reality. And so the point here is that the bid'ah hasana is a blessing, that we can do something like the mawlid, which everything in it has a foundation in the sharia, the dhikr, the istighfar, the salawat, all of those things, to somewhat approximate what it would have been like to have been in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ. What a blessing. So that's how we understand some of the dimensions of bid'ah. But in general, we want to be very careful to change things of the past. And so you remember when Sidi Abbas was talking about how Habib Ali went back to Habib Abdul Qadir, and Habib Abdul Qadir said, no, this is the right thing to do at that time. This is what's very important. There's a fine line between reform and renewal. And knowledge is a part of this, but knowledge is not enough to determine this. You also need people to have a strong spiritual state and a direct connection to Rasulullah to help guide that process. But the general way is to be wary, not to change things, to do what needs to be done based upon how the great Imams did it before. And then, as we look out, and for instance, we look at our needs here in England, in the United States of America, we're definitely going to have needs here that you don't have, and the other places that different scholarly teachings went. But we have to very carefully and responsibly, with bringing multiple people in, with mutual consultation, with praying istikhara, with bouncing ideas off our teachers, to do what it is that we need to do so that we can do something that's meaningful and right moving forward. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. And this is one of the things that is, we're so hopeful. I can't tell you how many times that I've heard our teachers say that how Islam is going to spread all throughout these lands. We've been hearing this for years and years and years. Not only in England, but throughout Europe. And it's going to spread all throughout the United States of America. And this is not me just saying this and being hopeful. And of course we're hopeful. But this is hearing this from people who have a perspective and have been made to understand certain nusus in the Quran and words of our Prophet ﷺ, and been given their explanation of what it means for our particular time. And that our job is to do our part in that, and to continue to come together and to go through the process of learning, putting that knowledge into practice so that we grow and we get closer to Allah Ta'ala, but then sharing with other people, spreading this light and being conduits of good for people. And this is what we really hope to see that happens in these blessed lands, is that there'll be a return to the highest and most sublime meanings that exist in creation, which is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to spend our lives trying to fulfill our purpose, which is that, to know Him. And hopefully that we're living in a time where we're going to see many people of Allah, many knowers of Allah in these various lands. They still have a connection to the Eastern lands, but the environments hopefully will be created here such that it can happen here, with people that are born here and raised here and learn here. And may Allah Ta'ala bless us to be from the elect of those who are means for this to happen, and may we live long enough to be able to see that and to see the fruits of the labor. And if we don't, at least we die trying, because anything that's not worth dying for is not worth living for, as Martin Luther King Jr. said. So inshallah, may we be from those people who plant those seeds and to do the work in a way that is pleasing to Allah, as they say, that be used ala al-wasf al-mahbubiyah, May we be used in a way that leads us to becoming beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, attaining the highest degrees of closeness to Him. And may everything we do bring the greatest happiness to the heart of our blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when his heart moves and when he inclines towards us, this opens up the door for us to attain the greatest that bliss that one can possibly attain in this world and in the hereafter. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
وجد بالنوال منه إليّ